We're dealing entirely with modern music in the sense of music written in the 20th century, actually not quite in the 20th century in one of the cases in this concert. But for a lot of people, that's still modern. The threshold of modern in music seems to go back quite a long way. John Adams's Shaker Loops was written in 1983. I can remember when it came out. I can remember some people on the really far extreme fringe of modernism really disliking it intensely because, oh dear, it was tonal. Oh dear, it was really quite approachable. It had tunes. We don't write music like that anymore. What's this character doing writing music like that? And yet here we are, 40 years later, I think it is 40, it really is. And it's still very much in the repertoire and being played. And this is one of the things that's striking about John Adams. There's very little music that's been written in my lifetime that's actually kept a hold in the repertory, particularly in the field of the opera house. But John Adams has written one of the vanishingly few modern operas that's actually stuck in the repertoire and is still played today, and that's the marvelous Nixon in China. And if you haven't heard it, I do recommend you seek out a video. Adams was inspired here. Shaker Loops, actually Shaker refers to the American religious movement, the Shakers, one of those extraordinary groups that wanted to cut themselves off from modern civilization and live a very pure life away from the distractions of wicked modernity around them, like the Amish, for instance. And they also had very strong tendency. They would get to meetings, and as they became, as it were, filled with the spirit, they felt, many of them would shake and convulse and dance strangely, which is where they got their nicknames from, the Shakers. And they liked it so much, they adopted it for themselves, rather like the Quakers, indeed. And the music for this, it's not so much that Adams takes Shaker hymns, but he does have some of that kind of elegant, pure, very clear simplicity that we associate, for instance, with Shaker art or with Shaker furniture or design that you can still see on exhibition today, very much today. It's rather interesting. I think it reflects something of the Scandinavian background of a lot of this culture. And Adams really gets that sense. A lot of the music uses what they call tremolando, where the string player's bows go backwards and forwards across the string, creating a kind of shaking sound. But it's this that gives it its exhilaration and excitement. It is a very moving and exciting piece. You don't really need to know anything about it. It's so compelling. It's one of those pieces you can just relax into and let it carry you. I do hope you enjoy it. Now, I'm afraid I can't tell you very much about Vivian Fung's String Sinfonietta because this is its first performance. However, I do know that she has based the ideas for her first movement particularly on Balinese gamelan music. Now, gamelan music is quite extraordinary. The first time that composers in the West got to hear of it was in the late 19th century, where composers like Debussy, for instance, and Ravel were stunned by this completely new sound. Gongs and bells are very much part of the sound of gamelan music. And beautiful, elegant, repetitive patterns are also at the key of it too. It's music that seems to have a kind of sense of timelessness about it. So much Western music seems to be on its way to somewhere. It's about a journey from A to B. Where do you start? Where do you go? And what's changed when you get to the end of the journey? This is different. And one of the things that Vivian Fung is doing is experimenting with trying to enter a different mental process, a different mindset in the attitude to music, where you're not heading on a journey from A to B. You're kind of rotating meditatively around an idea. And I must say, I'm really looking forward to hearing what she does with this. Finally, the name Schoenberg, Arnold Schoenberg. I know there'll be some of you for whom that name will probably evoke a kind of terror. It's fascinating, isn't it, that I did a talk, an illustrated talk with musicians in Glasgow a few years ago about Schoenberg's one-act opera Erwartung, which is a kind of Freudian nightmare set for soprano and large orchestra. It's a terrifying piece. It was quite a success, but even though it was written in 1909, a lady came up to me at the end of the concert and said, "Do you know, Mr. Johnson, That sounds more modern than anything that's being written today. There's still something extraordinary about Schoenberg. He has this ability to challenge and unsettle in a way that I think a lot of modern composers actually secretly rather envy. But Verklärte Nacht, Transfigured Night, the title might sound a little bit scary, but actually, this is one of Schoenberg's earliest masterpieces. He wrote it in 1899, just on the cusp of the 20th century, at a time when he was still very much in love with the music of Wagner. And it's much more in a tonal, romantic frame of mind. It was inspired by a poem by a great Austrian poet called Richard Demmel. And the story tells of a man and a woman who meet in a forest at night. Forests are always very important in German and Austrian art. They're the places, magical places, where strange encounters can happen and life-transforming events take place. The man and the woman are not married. They're in love with each other, but she is married to someone else and is bearing her husband's child. In an extraordinary dialogue between the man and the woman, the man says, "Our love will transform this child and make it ours." Well, it's a nice idea, let's put it that way. Maybe not so practical in the emotional day-to-day terms, but that's the idea of the piece. And Schoenberg not only responds very intimately and tenderly to the music of the poem, the woman's words first, and then the man's words in response, and then the rather ecstatic, beautiful depiction of the nightscape and the stars glittering at the end as the two wander off into the forest together. He even, in some places, takes actual lines from the poem and, as it were, sets them wordlessly to music. For instance, in German, the woman's words, "I have a child, but not by you," are "Ich habe ein Kind, doch nicht von dir." I have a child, but not by you. Schoenberg actually sets that, as it were, wordlessly to music. Da 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 dum, da 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 da. So the violas at that point are actually intoning the woman's words. There are various other points where you'll notice there's a kind of almost speech-like or song-like quality about some of the instrumental writing. This is because Schoenberg is responding minutely to Demmel's words. Well, the first performance, even though this was relatively easy by Schoenberg's later standards, was a bit of a catastrophe. A lot of people didn't like it. There were cat calls and hisses. And even before it got to this stage of being performed, one of the musical bodies to which Schoenberg submitted the score turned it down because there was a dissonance in it they didn't like. Now, this is going to make you laugh. If I just play you the passage in question, here we are. By modern standards, that doesn't sound pretty terrifying, does it? It sounds pretty clearly tonal. It's in the key of D minor. But it was this chord that apparently the authorities took exception to. It didn't tick any of the boxes in the musical academic textbooks at the time, and so they objected and rejected the piece. Well, compared to some of the chords that Schoenberg was to create later, it's pretty mild, isn't it? I mean, that's not so strange when you compare it to something like this. I do think that's rather beautiful. That's from one of Schoenberg's later piano pieces. In any case, however, Richard Demmel himself, the poet, was at the first performance, and he was delighted. He really felt that Schoenberg had got to the heart of his poem. I think he was right. I think it's a beautiful piece. Extraordinary. You might say, one of the last great flowerings of late Romanticism before Schoenberg turned to the world of atonality and the extraordinary shadowy darkness that he was to unveil there. But I'm quite struck by the fact that towards the end of his life, when Schoenberg's reputation was almost entirely as a fearsome modernist, apparently one of the things he liked to do most was get out the recording of Verklärte Nacht and play along with it on the piano. There was a side of Schoenberg that still wanted to be liked. "All I want in the end," he said, "is for people to whistle my tunes in the street." Well, listening to some of his later music, you might find that that's quite a tough order. But listening to this, it's not. It's full of beautiful tunes, exquisite writing for the strings, not least, as I said, in that incredible depiction of the starlit night at the end, which is almost like the famous Van Gogh painting, The Starry Night. It's quite remarkable, luminous writing. So if you're new to Schoenberg and he sounds frightening, I recommend you definitely start with this piece and then kind of move forward in time with him. And if you follow his own development from that chord to that chord, I think you'll see how he developed and why he felt the way he had to go. And who knows, even atonality may start to make sense to you too. For the moment, though, we're on much safer ground. One of the most beautiful masterpieces of the Romantic tone poem literature, and I really do hope you enjoy it.